What happens when the man who taught a generation how to dance must learn how to grieve? When the spotlight of fame stops illuminating your triumphs and begins exposing your deepest wounds instead? John Travolta has stood at the absolute peak of stardom, not once, but twice in a single lifetime. He commanded $20 million per film. His face stretched across billboards in cities he had never visited. The world knew his name before he even walked into a room. But he has also stood beside 3 deathbeds, holding the hands of the people he loved most, feeling them slip away while the cameras waited somewhere else. 2 Academy Award nominations, 5 decades of performances that burned themselves into the collective memory of an entire culture, a personal fortune estimated at $250 million. And none of it, not one single dollar, not one standing ovation, could shield him from the losses that would ultimately define him far more than any role ever could. This is not a story about Hollywood magic. It is not a celebration of celebrity glamour or red carpet glory. This is a story about a man who discovered, in the most painful way imaginable, that no amount of applause can drown out the sound of a final heartbeat. And here is something most people never realize about John Travolta. There is a moment buried deep in his story, a turning point so quietly devastating that everything that came after it begins to make a different kind of sense. We will get there, but first, you need to understand where he started. At 70 years old, with Saturday Night Fever and Grease permanently etched into the DNA of popular culture, John Travolta has learned something that most of us will spend our entire lives trying to avoid understanding. Sometimes survival itself is the greatest performance a person can give. Sometimes the bravest thing anyone can do is simply wake up in the morning and choose to continue. John Joseph Travolta entered the world on February 18, 1954, in Inglewood, New Jersey. He was the youngest of 6 children born into a family where dreams had to fight for space alongside unpaid bills and the quiet dignity of working people doing their best. His father, Salvatore, had once played semi-professional football. Those glory days were distant memories now, worn smooth by time and circumstance. He sold tires for a living, coming home each night with hands stained black from rubber and exhaustion carved into the lines of his face. His mother, Helen Cecilia Burke, had once sung with the Sunshine Sisters on radio programs that filled American living rooms with warmth and music. But she had traded that stage for a high school classroom, teaching drama to teenagers who rarely stopped long enough to appreciate what stood before them. Money in the Travolta household was not just tight, it was nearly invisible. Young John watched his parents perform their own kind of dance, the careful, exhausting choreography of making ends meet. Dinner meant measured portions and no second helpings. New clothes were a luxury reserved for occasions that rarely arrived. Hand-me-downs from older siblings came already shaped by other bodies and other ambitions. The family lived in an Irish-American neighborhood where struggle was the shared language, where winter cold seeped through thin walls, and where the future felt like something that happened to other kinds of people. But Helen Travolta possessed something no amount of poverty could touch. She had vision. She saw something in her youngest child that transcended their cramped house and nearly empty bank account. She whispered to him in those early years that talent was the great equalizer, that the stage did not care about your address or your father's paycheck. She told him that being poor was temporary, but being ordinary, she said, was forever. Those words planted themselves deep inside John's heart like seeds waiting patiently for the right season. When John turned 16, he made a decision that would have frightened most parents into sleepless nights. He stood up from his desk at Dwight Morrow High School in his junior year and walked away from the conventional path entirely. He dropped out, choosing uncertainty over safety. Remarkably, his parents supported him without hesitation. His mother looked at him with a quiet intensity he would never forget and delivered the message that became his life's compass. "If this is what you want," she told him, "then you must give it everything. No backup plan, no safety net. You either make it or you become a cautionary tale." Those words became his engine. John crossed the Hudson River into New York City carrying barely enough money for a week. He slept on floors that smelled of mildew and abandoned ambitions. He auditioned for everything and swallowed rejection after rejection like bitter medicine he had no choice but to take. He landed a role in a touring production of Grease, not as Danny, the leading man, but as Duty, a supporting character hovering in the background. He made his Broadway debut in Over Here, a show that closed quickly and left barely a trace in theater history. He worked odd jobs that ground down his dignity one shift at a time. His fingers went numb distributing flyers on frozen New York streets while the wind cut straight through his jacket. He hauled equipment for productions that paid almost nothing, his back aching, his pride quietly wounded. He sang for audiences whose eyes glazed over while he poured everything he had onto small, indifferent stages. He filmed television commercials that aired once and disappeared without a trace. He took any work that came because saying no meant going hungry, and going hungry meant admitting defeat. But he kept moving forward, because stopping meant proving his mother wrong, and that was a reality he simply could not live with. Each rejection became fuel. Every closed door became a reason to knock on the next one. He was building calluses on his soul, the kind that only come from genuine suffering, and the kind that would serve him in the brutal years still ahead. Then 1975 arrived and changed everything. Welcome Back, Cotter premiered on television, and John Travolta, playing the lovable, irresistible fool Vinnie Barbarino, became an overnight sensation at just 21 years old. Girls screamed his name in the streets. His face appeared on magazine covers in grocery stores from coast to coast. He released a single called Let Her In that climbed all the way to number 10 on the Billboard Hot 100. For the first time in his life, John Travolta could breathe without the crushing weight of poverty pressing down on his chest. But fame is a dangerous and deceptive thing, and 1976 would teach him that lesson in a way no one could have prepared him for. On the set of a television movie called The Boy in the Plastic Bubble, Travolta met Diana Hyland. She was 41 years. He was 22 years old, a young man still getting used to the weight of sudden fame on his shoulders. She played his mother in the film, despite the 18-year age gap, despite the whispers and sideways glances from the outside world. None of that mattered. They fell completely and utterly in love. "I have never been more in love with anyone in my life," Travolta would confess years later. "I thought I knew what love was before. I did not." From the moment they met on set, something ignited between them. They talked constantly, endlessly, like two people who had been waiting their whole lives for someone who could keep up. After about a month, the friendship became something deeper and more consuming. They were inseparable after that, escaping together to Palm Springs, to Big Bear, to New York. Diana's young son from a previous marriage came along, folding himself into the life they were quietly building together. Travolta felt, perhaps for the first time, that he had found his other half. He chose a house for them. They made plans to move in together the moment he finished filming his next project, a movie called Saturday Night Fever. The future stretched out before them, bright and seemingly endless. But Diana Hyland was dying. She had undergone a mastectomy 2 years before they ever met, the cancer already quietly spreading through her body while they laughed together on set and whispered plans into each other's ears. She did not know with certainty that she was going to die until just 2 weeks before the end. Travolta later revealed that during the filming of Saturday Night Fever, while he was in the process of becoming the biggest star on the planet, they spoke every single evening by phone. Her voice grew fainter with each call. His desperation grew louder. He pressed the receiver harder against his ear as though sheer will could make her stronger. When the end became inevitable, he abandoned the movie set without hesitation and rushed back to Los Angeles the day before she died. They walked together in the garden. She touched flowers she would never see bloom again. He held her hand with the quiet, helpless intensity of someone who understands that love cannot always save the person you love. They spoke of small, ordinary things, because the large things, the unbearable things, were simply too enormous to put into words. On March 27, 1977, Diana Hyland died in John Travolta's arms. "I felt the breath go out of her," he whispered years later, the memory still sitting close to the surface, still raw in places grief never fully heals. He was 23 years old, standing on the very edge of superstardom, holding the woman he loved as she took her final breath. He learned something in that moment that no film set or acting class could ever have taught him. Success and sorrow are not opposites. They are twins, born together, inseparable for life. At Diana's memorial service, John wore a white suit. They had chosen it together for a trip to Rio de Janeiro, a trip they would never take. He stood among the mourners in that white suit, carrying the weight of a future that no longer belonged to either of them. "The hardest 10 weeks of my life," he said afterward. He survived the only way he knew how. He worked. He promoted Saturday Night Fever. He became the character the world was demanding he be. And Saturday Night Fever did not simply succeed. It exploded like a cultural bomb detonating in the center of an entire generation. The image of Travolta in a white polyester suit, one arm thrust toward heaven on a lit dance floor, became the defining symbol of an era. The Bee Gees soundtrack sold in numbers that staggered the music industry. Travolta earned his first Academy Award nomination. Then Grease arrived in 1978, grossing nearly $400 million worldwide, and cementing its place as the highest-grossing live-action movie musical of all time. By 1980, with Urban Cowboy adding yet another chapter to his legend, John Travolta was genuinely everywhere. But the cost was devastating in ways the public could not see. His body sagged beneath the relentless demand for more movies, more interviews, more performances, more joy delivered on command. His mind swung between private grief for Diana and the dizzying, disorienting rush of fame that never paused long enough for him to catch his breath. There was no time to mourn properly. No space. The world demanded he dance and smile and embody something bright and effortless. So he danced. He smiled. He buried his pain beneath choreography and sequence, performing happiness for the cameras, while his heart quietly bled somewhere the audience could not reach. Then the fall began, and it was more brutal than almost anyone could have predicted. Films started failing, one after another, with a relentlessness that felt almost personal. Moment by moment in 1978 was a critical and commercial disaster that left reviewers searching for diplomatic language and failing to find it. Two of a Kind in 1983 flopped at the box office without ceremony. Staying Alive that same year, despite his star power, disappointed nearly everyone who had hoped for something worthy of him. Perfect in 1985 was dismantled by critics who seemed to take a particular pleasure in watching him stumble in public. Each failure chipped away at something, at the confidence, at the sense of invincibility he had carried since those electric first years. The armor was coming apart, piece by piece. But here is something most people overlook entirely when they talk about this period of John Travolta's life. And this is where the real story gets complicated in ways that still echo today. The roles he turned down during this decade did not just represent missed opportunities. They became some of the most legendary films in the history of American cinema. And the reasons he said no reveal something much deeper than simple bad judgment. The opportunities that slipped quietly through his fingers, while he was busy making choices that seemed perfectly reasonable at the time. American Gigolo went to Richard Gere and made him a star overnight. An Officer and a Gentleman went to Richard Gere and cemented that stardom into something permanent. Splash went to Tom Hanks and launched an entirely different kind of Hollywood legacy. Each decision felt logical in the moment. Each one became a wound that would not stop bleeding. By the late 1980s, John Travolta was no longer a star. He was a relic, a punchline in late-night monologues, a cautionary tale whispered quietly on movie sets about the price of poor judgment and squandered momentum. His 1989 film The Experts was so thoroughly ignored by audiences and critics alike that it might as well have never been made at all. His career was not simply struggling, it was in complete ruins. The phone calls from producers stopped coming. The scripts that had once arrived by the dozen vanished entirely. The man who had made the whole world dance, who had sold out theaters on his name alone, was now invisible, still breathing, still talented. But the industry had closed ranks and moved on without him, and the silence was deafening. "Some people carry pain like a badge," Travolta said years later. "I carry it quietly in the spaces between heartbeats." Then Look Who's Talking arrived in 1989, a light romantic comedy about a talking baby that somehow, improbably, grossed nearly $300 million worldwide. It was not a resurrection. It was a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. He made the sequels. He floated through the early 90s treading water, waiting for something to shift. And then Quentin Tarantino called. Tarantino wanted Travolta for the role of Vincent Vega, a heroin-addicted hitman in a film called Pulp Fiction. Travolta hesitated for 6 months. He agonized over the decision. He questioned everything. Finally, he said yes. Pulp Fiction did not merely revive his career. It rewrote the rules entirely. His performance was a masterclass in controlled chaos, loose and dangerous and utterly magnetic. His dance sequence with Uma Thurman reminded a generation that had nearly forgotten him that this man still possessed something rare and undeniable. His chemistry with Samuel L. Jackson crackled with electricity in every single scene. The film won the Palme d'Or at Cannes. Travolta earned his second Academy Award nomination. And suddenly, impossibly, against every reasonable expectation, he was back. Get Shorty, Face Off, Primary Colors. For one glorious decade, he commanded $20 million per film. He had accomplished what almost no one in the history of Hollywood had managed to pull off. He had risen from the dead. But resurrection, as John Travolta would learn again and again throughout his life, always demands a payment. In 1991, Travolta married actress Kelly Preston. With Kelly, he found not just love but something rarer and more sustaining: sanctuary. They built a life together and had 3 children. Jet, born in 1992, Ella Blue, born in 2000, and Benjamin, born in 2010. Jet was diagnosed with autism and suffered from seizures. The family learned to navigate that reality together, surrounding him with fierce, unwavering love and adapting their entire world to meet his needs. Then came January 2nd, 2009. The family was vacationing in the Bahamas. 16-year-old Jet was found unresponsive in the bathroom. He had suffered a seizure and struck his head on the bathtub. "I ran downstairs to help my son," Travolta testified afterward. He performed CPR with desperate, trembling hands, trying to bring his boy back by sheer force of love and will. But Jet was gone. The symmetry of it was almost too cruel to absorb. Diana at 41, Jet at 16, both sudden, both shattering, both leaving John standing in the wreckage of something irreplaceable, searching for a reason to keep standing. Jet was the most wonderful son that two parents could ever ask for, John and Kelly said, in a joint statement released to a world that could only watch from the outside. "We are heartbroken that our time with him was so brief." 1 year later, Kelly gave birth to Benjamin. "He gave the house a renewed spirit," John said. "They tried to rebuild their lives around this new and tender joy, tried to let healing find the edges of a wound they knew would never fully close." But on July 12, 2020, Kelly Preston died at 57 years old after a 2-year private battle with breast cancer. "It is with a very heavy heart," John wrote publicly, "that I inform you that my beautiful wife Kelly has lost her battle with breast cancer. The pattern was too devastating to ignore, too precise to simply call coincidence. Diana at 41 taken by breast cancer. Kelly at 57 taken by breast cancer. The same disease, the same devastation. The two women he had loved most in his life taken by the same quiet and merciless enemy." After Kelly's death, John had a conversation with 10-year-old Benjamin that broke something open inside him. "Because Mom passed away," the boy whispered to his father, "I'm afraid you're going to die too." John Travolta did not reach for comfortable reassurances. He did not offer his son a soft lie wrapped in a father's good intentions. "Ben," he said, "I could die tomorrow, you could. Anybody can. It is part of life. You just do your best at trying to live the longest you can." Now, at 70 years old, John Travolta lives on his estate in Ocala, Florida, a sprawling property beside a private runway, where he keeps multiple aircraft and the particular kind of solitude that only comes to people who have survived more than their share. His net worth stands at $250 million. But what defines him now is not wealth, it is endurance. He supports the Jet Travolta Foundation, helping other families navigating the daily realities of autism and seizure disorders. He raises Ella and Benjamin with the fierce, almost fierce devotion of a man who understands precisely how fragile the people you love truly are. He posts tributes to those he has lost, Diana, Jet, Kelly, keeping their memories alive with the quiet stubbornness of someone who refuses to let grief be the final word. His recent films earn almost nothing at the box office. The industry that once worshipped him has largely moved on to younger faces carrying fresher stories. The roles have thinned. The spotlight has drifted. The phone does not ring the way it once did. "Applause fades," he once said. "Trophies gather dust, but the people you love, the moments you shared with them, these endure beyond everything else." John Travolta's journey stretches from a tire shop in Inglewood, New Jersey, to the absolute pinnacle of global fame and back down again. From holding a dying lover at 23, to burying a son, to losing the wife who had been his shelter through it all. From disco king to forgotten man to legend, and back to something quieter and more human than any of those labels can contain. His life teaches us something that no screenplay could quite capture. That survival itself is a form of triumph. That love is worth every ounce of grief it will inevitably cost you. That even when the music stops, even when the floor goes dark and the crowd goes home, Some dancers simply keep moving forward. Because if John Travolta can keep going after everything life has handed him, perhaps the rest of us can find it in ourselves to keep going too.